With coronavirus cases rapidly rising in Massachusetts, Governor Charlie Baker has issued new guidelines for people coming into the state.
And starting today, all travelers arriving to the Commonwealth are instructed to self-quarantine for 14 days for the sake of protecting the most vulnerable among us all, our parents, grandparents, and those with underlying health conditions.
He also added he does not think the state will be back up and running by Easter. On Capitol Hill, the House passed that massive $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus package this afternoon and sent it to the president. And as we mentioned, his daily press briefings have created a dilemma for a lot of broadcasters. First, they come at a time when many are airing nightly newscasts. And secondly, they are long and often riddled with inaccuracies or falsehoods.
From the start, the president said anyone who wanted a test could get one. He also called the tests perfect, which he later denied.
The president also claiming today that he never said the testing situation was perfect.
And the tests are all perfect, like the letter.
He also said people flying into the country were all being tested.
We have a tremendous testing setup where people coming in have to be tested.
It's just flat not happening.
And he downplayed the seriousness of the illness and its spread.
We're going to be pretty soon at only 5 people, and we could be at just 1 or 2 people over the next short period of time.
He also gave hope to millions of Americans by suggesting that the anti-malarial drug chloroquine can treat COVID-19.
But we think it might work on this, based on evidence.
Turns out the drug was only tried on a handful of people. And more recently, the president said he wants the country up and running by Easter.
I would love to have it open by Easter. I will tell you that right now.
But the National Institutes of Health's Dr. Anthony Fauci was far more cautious.
So I think people might get the misinterpretation. You're just going to lift everything up, and even somebody's going like that. That's not going to happen.
Earlier today, I spoke with CNN's chief media correspondent, Brian Stelter, about the struggle. Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So the networks are in a tough position. If they don't carry these live briefings live, they will be accused of political bias. On the other hand, people like the Washington Post's Margaret Sullivan, who's the media critic there, says they have absolutely no public benefit. What's your position on it?
I think if there's misinformation at briefings and we are showing those briefings live, then our fact checks and rebuttals and corrections need to be even livelier. We need to amplify the truth much more loudly and frequently than lies or misinformation. Or in the case of President Trump, oftentimes it's false hope. It's a form of wishful thinking that is in complete contrast to the facts that we have. He comes out and acts as if things are getting better when, in fact, everyday things here in New York City and where you are and in many parts of the country are getting worse every single day. I feel it as a New Yorker. I can hear the sirens every hour. The president doesn't seem to be addressing any of that. So a lot of what he's doing isn't, a classic lie. It's just not accurate. It's not helpful information. And I think in those cases, if we're going to air the briefings, we have to make sure we surround the briefings with the accurate information. But look, I understand why some people are saying don't air the briefings at all. Yeah. This is a really difficult topic.
Well, as I'm sure you know, the Daily Beast is reporting that staffers at your network, CNN, and at MSNBC are calling on the bosses to stop doing this. One MSNBC staffer said, this is like open mic night, referring to Sunday when he was talking about how many billions of dollars he's lost. Have you heard some grumblings inside CNN about that?
I definitely think there are mixed opinions about how to handle any politician or political leader or any leader who is constantly spreading misinformation. This is most obviously the problem with President Trump and has been for 3 years. And we've seen networks pull back on covering rallies, for example. The head of CNN even said CNN showed too many of those rallies live, unedited back in 2016. These briefings have kind of become a new form of rally for President Trump. But I think the challenge is that in the midst of a national emergency, the president's words do matter and do matter enormously. And I tend to take the view that if the president's out there acting unpresidential, failing to lead the country, we need to show that just once, and then we can explain it and contextualize it. I think if we didn't show the briefing at all, or if MSNBC didn't, or if other channels didn't, wouldn't we be missing a big part of the story, which is a failure of leadership?
You said earlier that the president is sometimes offering false hope. And I'm sure you're referencing we want this over by Easter Sunday. It'll be a beautiful thing. But is the media grasping at those kinds of things? I mean, that's kind of insignificant, and yet we all jumped on that.
I do think that there's a instinct among many in the national press, and I count myself guilty of this sometimes, to just cover the Trump story because it's relatively easy and it's always very important. Because whatever the president's doing is important. But right now, what's much more important is the health story. What's happening on the healthcare front? What's happening in the hospitals? In some ways, the Trump story is relatively small as a proportion of this entire pandemic event that we're all living through. So I do think there's a fair argument or a fair critique that, yes, we've got to acknowledge what the president's doing or not doing, but let's focus on the hospitals and the healthcare workers instead.
There's an ad campaign out there right now by Priorities USA, which is basically picking some of the language out of what Trump has said. One of them was calling the virus a hoax. And the Trump campaign has sent a cease and desist letter to television stations that are running that. But they're saying it's fair game that he used those words. What do you think?
Yes, and he did use those words, and he's never going to be able to take those words back, despite the attempts of propagandists like Sean Hannity to rewrite history and claim the president was always on the top of this at the very beginning. Those words are written down, they are recorded, he can't run away from them, but it is disturbing to see the president's allies sending legal letters to local TV stations, basically threatening them that their licenses could be in jeopardy by running these ads. Now that is disturbing because the president runs the executive branch, which includes the FCC, which includes the licensing of television stations. So this is yet another example of the president seeming to use his political power to threaten news outlets and media companies. The good news is, in this case, as in other cases, local stations are not backing down. They don't seem intimidated by the threat, and they don't seem to be pulling the ad because, look, the ad is essentially accurate. The ad is not violation of some standard. It's just putting his words, in an attack ad.
Brian, 3.5 weeks ago, we were going nonstop political campaigns. That has virtually disappeared from all of our television screens. Are we doing viewers a disservice there? I know there can't be public rallies. We do carry Biden. We've even carried Bernie Sanders recently, but is that a mistake?
I think it's actually extraordinary how this timing lined up, where Joe Biden seemed to pull ahead at just the moment when the campaign season had to be put on pause, had to be put on hold. Maybe that's just one of these, surprises about history that the campaign season started to slow down at the time this pandemic sped up. But that said, we need to keep asking for interviews with Biden and Sanders and acknowledge that this is all happening in the midst of a national election. I think people are right to wonder about the conventions this summer and about how people will be able to vote this November.
Do you think that's wishful thinking on the part of the media to recruit Andrew Cuomo?
I don't know if I'm seeing people trying to recruit Andrew Cuomo, but there's an acknowledgement that he's showing incredible leadership. Look, as a New Yorker, I love to make fun of and complain about New York politicians. But in this moment, I think New Yorkers feel so relieved to have Cuomo in charge. What that means for him a few months from now, I have no idea.
All right, Brian Stelter, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.